the way they were taking out drawers and throwing everything on the floor.
They came in and they said, "You are arrested for political reasons." And then they took us to a gathering spot, which was an old Polish fortress in Krakow. And here we coming from those very nice apartments with plenty of food and clothes. And here we come, straw on the floor, cold. And we were received by the Jewish Community Center.
My friend was in charge in a welfare department there. So he had the order to go and pick up some family and assign some apartments for them.
And he said, "Don't worry, I have 2 empty apartments. You will be with me."
They came up with a droshka. You know what is droshka? Horse and carriage. And I was waiting. I didn't know that he's bringing any company.
And he said he has to stop and let his brother know that they have guests. And he stopped. And who does he come back to the dorożka? With my husband, future husband.
I met this way my wife Friday night.
We still were hoping we'll go over like a bad storm, a bad dream. Nobody could believe it will go on forever and ever.
How can all this be happening and nobody is doing anything about it? It just won't last.
Somebody was knocking on the door, and I was alone with my mother, and my mother looked through the looker, you know, in the door. She saw a guy with a big swastika, and she was thinking it's Gestapo. And I said to her, "Let's come in." And I hid behind the door and listened to the conversation. My mother was very talented interior decorator. And he came to my mother recommended by a Jew for my mother redecorate his apartment. And from his way how he was talking to my mother, I realized the man is some different type of guy. And I stepped forward. And he's taller, he was taller than I, but I consider I was pretty handsome, and he was extremely handsome man. I look at his eye, he looks in my eyes, and what happened? Some thread of sympathy, some understanding between the German Catholic and the Jewish Polish officer started. And this way they start the friendship between me and Oskar Schindler, what lasted till the day he died.
Schindler came as a black marketeer to Poland, and his only aim was to make money.
He didn't come to Poland to save Jews. He came to Poland to make his fortune, and he did.
One day, they said all the Jewish people has to move to the ghetto.
We just had to walk out from the house. Then the Polish people stood on the sidewalk and they were yelling, "Good riddance, go, don't come back." Such hate, it was such hate, such unbelievable hate.
We were numb. I remember I couldn't even cry. I couldn't cry. I didn't know if I was alive or I was dead.
At first, we didn't have any walls around the ghetto, but then they started putting up a wall around the ghetto, and they even bricked in windows and doors, of buildings facing towards the outside of the ghetto.
When we moved to the ghetto, we were assigned one room with 2 windows. For each window, they assigned 3 people. So when the room had 2 windows, 6 people had to live in that room.
My father, during that period of time, was working in Schindler's company. Schindler took over a factory that made enamel pots and pans. And his Jewish workers came to work from the ghetto. Schindler had actually increased his Jewish workforce, so my father asked Schindler if he could take my older brother. Schindler did just that, so my father and my brother used to march out to go to Schindler's company and come back.
I was assigned to work in a factory which, in those days, repaired the German uniforms. And one day they said to us, "You're not going back to the ghetto today. We need you." They didn't say why. And they told us to stay. They gave us something to eat. They told us to sleep on the tables, on the benches. The next day we worked all day. And in the evening, as usual, they took us back to the ghetto. And the ghetto was half empty.
The ghetto was simply a holding pen. And the evidence, of course, we know is that immediately after the ghetto was created, where everyone was herded into it in mass, they began to take people out in transports and sending them somewhere else.
Those people were sent someplace, supposed to be to the labor camps.
The first transport ever taken out of the ghetto actually was one where they took people out the countryside and had them do labor and return. And they went back to their families. But the subsequent transports never returned.
2 assessmen walked into our room, armed, and dragged my father out. He turned around to us, tried to put us at ease, and he says, "Don't worry, children. They're taking me to work. They need me." I was just looking, staring at him, and he just, with his sweet smile, turned and he said, don't you worry. I'll be okay. They need me." Those were his words, his last words.
There came an announcement that they're going to change Kennzeichen, which was the identification, for another identification called the Blauschein. My sister, my father, and myself got the Blauschein. My mother didn't. We heard marching 5 o'clock in the morning. Sure enough, the whole ghetto was surrounded. SS marched into the ghetto.
My mother told me to hide. We lived in an old building. The back of it was connected with the street behind. And there was big bushes and big trees. And my grandfather and my grandmother and myself, we lay down under the bushes. My mother and her sister covered us with leaves. And they left.
In between our 2 buildings where we lived, there was a small building. Above that was an attic, but it didn't look like it would have an attic because it was sort of like a lean-to in the courtyard. So my mother decided that that's where I was going to hide, with 2 of my friends.
In our room was a little closet. We put my mother into the closet, and we shoved an armoire against the door of the closet, so the door was not visible.
My mother wasn't going to hide, she was just going to take her chances and probably be shipped off. But she remembered that we were up there and we didn't have anything to eat or drink.
They made an announcement that every inhabitant of the ghetto should report to this courtyard of a huge building in which we lived.
My mother filled up a teapot and she was carrying it across the yard to hand it to us.
And we all went down to the courtyard. And the Germans came and they were checking everybody's papers. Whoever didn't have the Blauschein, they sent outside.
And as she was coming up, the guards broke in and started yelling. So she set the teapot down and just by instinct, just crawled up into this crawl space.
Then, while we were still standing at the square, they made searches from room to room, from house to house. We were standing in the courtyard watching while they walked into our apartment, where my mother was hidden in the closet, and our hearts stopped.
And the Germans are running around in there yelling.
Bringing people out of other apartments, little children and women.
They hauled the woman, the mother of those 2 children, out.
We heard shots outside, how they were shooting people outside. It was just a horrible thing that lasted practically the whole day.
When nightfall came, things began to quiet down. We could just hear sporadic shootings and yelling.
I remember it was very, very quiet, and we just lay there, and we lay there. And my mother came in again with her sister, and she says, "It's all right, you can come out now, everybody's gone."
We pushed away the armoire, we opened the door, my mother was on the floor faint. Because there was lack of air and the fright and everything else.
And all of a sudden, from the back, 2 soldiers came. It was probably the last patrol of the day. They were not supposed to be there anymore. They were supposed to have left. And of course, they asked for papers, and my grandparents didn't have any. And they took them. They took them. I just remember standing there, and they were walking away, with nothing. They were walking away.
Somebody came the following day and called us by name. My father had sent someone and he didn't know whether we survived or not, but he thought by some chance if we did, if he called us by name, maybe we would come on, and we did.
That day, they deported 7,000 people and they killed 1,000.
There were starting to be rumors very soon, about early 1942. One man was able to flee, to escape from Auschwitz. He said that people are being exterminated there in the gas chambers.
He started to talk to us about what he saw with his own eyes. Nobody believed him, particularly people who were in charge in the Jewish Council. They were thinking that he got crazy.
We didn't believe it because, you see, if, God forbid, it would happen now, we had a precedent in history. We would be maybe watchful, maybe we will be more frightened. But in those days, there was no precedent in history. Who could visualize that a man is capable to do something like this to another man?
The Germans began to build a camp just outside of Krakow, Plaszów. And some people were slowly being moved into Plaszów, and those people who were building the camp, for example, already lived there.
We didn't know whether this will be a labor camp or whatever, but we were resigned. Whatever will happen, will happen.
The Germans came very early in the morning, about 4:30 in the morning, and they were running through the ghetto. The truck was driving through the ghetto with loudspeakers, that everybody had to pack up and leave the ghetto by 6 o'clock at night.
But they would only allow those people to leave who had jobs. And everyone who remained was taken directly to the death camps.
Germans always yelling and screaming.